Well, bonjour tout le monde. Je suis à Parc La Fontaine. C'est une belle parc dans le plateau. Welcome to another video. Bienvenue. Today I'm going to talk about growing up in Vancouver and living in Vancouver versus Montreal. And I'm going to do some comparisons of the two cities. They're very different from one another. Really, really different cultures altogether and different demographically. And I would say from living in Montreal for the last 4.5 years now, can't believe it's been that long, there's almost nothing about this city that reminds me of Vancouver, except for a bit of downtown and maybe the business district, which has some feel of being in Canada to it. Other than that, it doesn't really feel like being in any part of Canada. There is, in regards to Montreal, like I would, if someone were to ask me, how would you describe Montreal, and what would you compare it to? Well, it's hard to compare it to any other city. It's its own unique. It's a unique place. But it does have somewhat of a European feel to it. There's some European architecture, French architecture, French colonial architecture, British colonial architecture, and some of the traditional Montreal apartments, like turn of the last century apartments, do remind me a little bit of New York, like the brick, the traditional walk-up apartments in Montreal do remind me a little bit of the brownstone apartments in New York City and Brooklyn. So I would say that a good way to describe Montreal to somebody who hasn't been here would be, and if I were to compare it to other cities, it would be like it's a combination of London, New York, and Paris. So there's reminders of all of those cities in Montreal, architecture-wise, culture-wise, etc. So I think a lot of people who visit Vancouver, or whenever I travel and I meet people from other places, and I tell them I'm from Vancouver, and they're like, "Oh, it's such a beautiful city. You're so lucky to live there." And I do agree with that. Yeah, I was lucky to grow up there. However, I just have a more complicated view of Vancouver, and my experiences of growing up there were, I have complex feelings about it. And I think Vancouver has changed quite a lot, and some for the better and some for the worse. And I would say, I'm sorry to say this, but mostly for the worse. Now, let's compare maybe the type of people who would like Vancouver versus Montreal, who would really dig Vancouver, and if they can afford it, it would be the ideal place for them. And that would be somebody who is very much an outdoors person and lives for that, lives for mountains, lives for being on the ocean all the time. And I would say that the West Coast is the perfect place for somebody like that. And certainly when I was growing up there, I took advantage of all that, of course. When I was a kid, I was on the ski team. I played hockey. I windsurfed. I took sailing lessons. I did all of that all the way up until I was about, in my 20s, until I got into music. And then I'm going to music school in Nelson, British Columbia. And then really my life kind of changed from there. And I became more of a musician and an artist. And being a musician and having those experiences being a professional musician in Vancouver for 20 plus, maybe 24 years. If you 25 years if you do count the pandemic, where I wasn't really doing much except being inside my apartment. And that sort of, and going back to music school, completing my degree in my 40s at Vancouver Community College, that, all of those experiences have kind of led me to being more of an artist, and I'm still a musician and a bass player. I love playing bass for people and playing in different projects and things like that. But since the pandemic, since I graduated with my degree in composition, and then the lockdown happened, I've sort of been, the direction I've gone in is to more being a composer, artist, and more focusing on original music. And that led me to moving to Montreal and pursuing more of that. I think the difference between the art scene and music scene in Montreal versus Vancouver is that, and both have really good music scenes, but Montreal has more of a built-in cultural scene here, whereas Vancouver has special curated events which cater to certain people, to a certain audience. Ooh, the sun's coming out here. Right over me, shining right in my face. It's good though. And things like the Montreal Jazz Festival here in Montreal, for example, takes place in one area of town, and the infrastructure of that festival is built into it. All the kiosks, all the lighting rigs, everything are there all year round to host different festivals throughout the summer, all the way from June through September. And that's really great. Vancouver doesn't have anything like that. There's definitely more support for the arts here. Being a language minority, like an Anglophone living here, can be challenging breaking into the arts scene here, because it is, I will admit, dominated by kind of the Francophone scene, and it's just, I think it just boils down to the fact that there are simply more Francophones here than Anglophones, and I think the Anglophone population of Quebec is about 20%, maybe, and the rest is, I think, Francophone, and I guess what you would call allophones, which are maybe Italian communities, for example, or Spanish communities, and they speak 3 languages, which a lot of those people are trilingual, which I'm really, really jealous of. So there's certain benefits to living here. It's a cheaper cost of living in Vancouver. If I was living in Vancouver, my expenses would go up probably about $800 to $1,000 a month easily, and that is if I didn't get a car and get insurance. So it's a tough one. I'm at a crossroads here currently. I don't really have any gigs or any work, and although I'm lucky to be able to have some passive income to sustain me, this can't go on forever, but I'm on one hand I really enjoyed here. On the other hand, I'm I'm struggling a bit trying to fit in and find some gigs here and community. And yeah, that's difficult because I do, again, I'll say that I do love it here. It's the best city in Canada, I think. And Vancouver has certain things that Montreal doesn't, and it has the ocean and the mountains and nature, but Montreal's got the culture and the European vibes and the joie de vivre. So let's talk a bit about demographics. Now, I haven't lived in Vancouver in quite a while, and there's been quite a bit of immigration there in the last 5 years. So Vancouver consists of, Anglophones, of British descent or Irish descent, Scottish descent, of course. And then there's always been a Chinese population there, I think ever since the beginning. And so there's always been some Chinese culture that's been a part of Vancouver. And there's a big Chinatown in Vancouver. There's a Chinatown here too, but it's bigger in Vancouver. It's more prominent Chinese community there. And also South Asia, a big South Asian community. So a lot of non-French speaking immigrants are in Vancouver, whereas in Montreal, a lot of the immigrants that have come here in the last 5-10 years or even much longer than that, it's an older city. You have people coming from, former French colonized Africa, and that which is Senegal, Morocco, Algeria. And then you have quite a few people on the plateau here in particular from France. And of course, so there's some Asian population that is here, like Vietnamese who are also French speaking that live here, but that's mostly in Vancouver. And then you have a Haitian community here as well that's been here a long, long time, who are also, of course, French speaking. And lately, I think there's been a lot of people coming here from Brazil, from Mexico, other Latin American, Central American countries. But that's also a thing in Vancouver as well. So I think if you're a French-speaking person, if you're immigrating here from a French-speaking country, rather, you will do very well here. You will find your community quite easily, and I've witnessed that. I've seen that. Which leads me to the subject of languages and the French language. So growing up on the West Coast, I was not really exposed to a lot of French. I did take French briefly in high school. I just didn't concentrate in the class. I don't know if my teacher was very good. I don't really remember. But, I just did not see the importance of it. And a lot of people who live on the West Coast, you don't need to learn a second language living on the West Coast of North America. And what I found is that the further east you go, the more bilingualism you have. So even in Ontario, especially if you live in the Ottawa, Gatineau area, it's very bilingual there because across the bridge from Ottawa is Gatineau, Quebec. And taking the train, the metro system there, you have the announcements in both French and English. And then you have Quebec, where the only official language is French, but a lot of Francophones who grow up in Quebec and especially Montreal learn English. And I think this is instilled in them from an early age from being surrounded by Anglophone provinces and the United States. And because of that, because a lot of people here are bilingual, a lot of Francophones and Quebecois are speak English, it can be fairly easy to get by as an Anglophone in Montreal who doesn't speak much French to an extent. And it used to be easier, but now there's stricter language laws which are implemented in 2022. The Bill C-96 it's called, and so it's just more challenging for Anglophones now. And it's also actually hard to learn French just going around and attempting conversational French, because people will pick up on the fact that you're not good at French, and they'll see flaws in the way you speak, and they'll start speaking English to you right away. Therefore, it's quite difficult to get a grasp on the language. I mean, you just need to be out there speaking it every day, and I don't. And I've done some of the apps, and I've taken some courses, but my conversational French is still not very good. I'm still looking at solutions for that, but that's where I'm at right now. So lastly, I wanted to talk about the climate. And as many people know, Quebec gets pretty harsh winters. It gets some pretty harsh winters out east. Not as bad as Winnipeg, which they call Winterpeg, or northern Alberta, or Edmonton, or even the East Coast sometimes. But yeah, you have 4 or 5 month winters here, and they can be pretty isolating. But the difference between the winters here and the difference between the winters on the West Coast and Vancouver is that there's much more sunlight. Even though it's cold, there's more sunny days, whereas Vancouver has this gray drizzle and low clouds all winter, which can be very depressing for me. And I think it causes a lot of seasonal affective disorder among people who live in Vancouver, and it certainly happens to me. So even though the winters here are really cold sometimes too cold to go out, usually if you have a good coat, you can go out in the winter. And if you've got good boots, so you won't slip on the ice, it can be actually pretty nice on a sunny day, and it's nice to get out in the morning. Sometimes it wakes you up. And then, the spring doesn't really happen until May here, and all of a sudden, mid-May, everything starts blooming. And there's this weird in-between period in April where it's just gray and dusty, and all the stuff that was not trapped under the ice, all the garbage and muck and everything comes, and dust comes out, and April is kind of a weird in-between month. And whereas in Vancouver, spring happens earlier, pretty normal, like late March, early April. And summer's mostly pretty mild weather, although it's getting hotter and hotter these days in the summers. Montreal's summers get really hot and humid, but everybody's out. And there's so many festivals here in the summer, and there's really, really nothing like it, like the summers here in Montreal in regards to the festivals and activities. And it's almost too much, it's an overload, because everyone wants to take advantage of the warm weather because of the long winters here. And it really has shaped the culture in this part of the world. And Montreal is a unique city because of all those factors. I think that's all I have to say for today, and I'm going to wrap it up now. And well, bonne journée or bonne soirée, wherever you are. Au revoir.